Welcome to the Fishing Daily podcast. My name is Oliver McBride. Today I have Pat Close from the Lough Fishermen's Co-operative, and he is here to speak about issues facing the eel fisheries on Lough Neagh. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you very much, Oliver.
So, Pat, what's happening with the eel fisheries on Lough Neagh at the moment?
Well, in relative terms, this is a reasonably quiet time for us. There are different elements to our operation here. I suppose with regard to the eel sector, it can be divided into the restocking of the lough, the fishing for brown eels during the summer months, and the fishing for the mature silver eels in the autumn months. So at this point in time, we're just lining up to begin our program of restocking the lough over the next few weeks. There are two elements to that. One is what we refer to as a natural recruitment of elvers into this river basin district, and the other is supplementary restocking, where we try to source glass eels from other areas in Europe where surpluses occur. So that's our focus at the moment. Amongst a number of challenges that we have to address this year arising from Brexit and related issues that are causing us some concern just now.
And what was the trade like before pre-Brexit? Had you any issues, or do you think will you be facing issues in the future because of the Brexit?
Well, I think undoubtedly we will be facing issues. Some of those issues are directly relating to Brexit. Others are as a consequence of Brexit, if you like to put it that way. And probably that latter category is the one that's causing most concern at this point in time. I need to explain that pre-Brexit, our main market was in continental Europe. About 80% of our throughput, which can amount to 280 to 300 tons of eels on an annual basis, 80% of those were going into the Netherlands. Some of them would have been sold in northern Germany and Belgium and neighbouring countries. But for the most part, they were used within Holland and would be retailed as a smoked eel product, a high-end product, high-value product. Lough Neagh, apart from being the largest wild eel fisher in Europe, is renowned for the quality of its produce, and that's not due to anything any input we have. It's the nature of the lake, the ecology of the lake, the biodiversity, the feeding substrate, all of those things produce fish of high value, of reasonably high value, and certainly top quality. The basic issue here is that a number of years ago, in fact in 2007, Europe introduced regulations to address a decline in the stock levels of the European eel. And I should explain that the species of eel found in Lough Neagh, Anguilla, to give it its Latin name, always known as European eel, is exactly the same species as found throughout Europe and indeed North Africa as well. So the significance of that is that whatever happens in this jurisdiction, for example, is seen to have an impact throughout Europe because it is a single stock fish. And there's no getting away from the fact that there has been a significant decline in the recruitment of these juvenile fish coming back into the system. Now, the eels cannot be bred commercially in activity, although the scientists have cracked it to an extent, but that's decades in the future, and whether it's affordable or not is another issue. But wild fisheries such as this and aquaculture units or eel farms across the continent are dependent on recruiting those juvenile fish from the wild. The European eel breeds in the Zaragoza Sea in the Gulf of Mexico, 3,500 miles from here, and those fish are carried on global currents to the coastlines of Europe, including Ireland, and in our case into the lower river band. And there's no getting away from the fact that for the last 30 years there's been a significant decline in those, hence the regulations to address that. Those regulations brought about restrictions in terms of the intensity of fishing, and where you could import or export to. Now, that was all encapsulated in what are known as eel management plans, and there were something like 115 of these across Europe. Um, Ours was approved in 2010. That programme in our case involved supplementary restocking, in other words, buying in additional fish to maintain a certain intensity of fishing. And since then, we've remained compliant with the requirements of that, if you want to call it a license from Europe to do that. And our trade was primarily with continental Europe and indeed GB as well, where the balance of the 19-20% of our production went into London, where the eels would be eventually retailed as a jelly deal product, which is a very traditional way of presenting eel meat, particularly in the East End of London. Now, of course, things have changed. We are grateful that because of the influence of the Northern Ireland Protocol, that has meant that we retain access to our European market. So we have that 80% outlet, if you like. The problem is that GB is now, in European terms, a third country. And as I said earlier, the restrictions on the trade previously meant that we could only trade within Europe, between member states within Europe. So therefore, straight away, we have lost the potential to market our eels in GB. That's one problem. An additional problem associated with that is that we would have relied quite heavily on sourcing supplies of glass eels from the Bristol Channel area in southwest England. And because this restriction in the trade of eels of any life stage applies to juvenile fish as well, then as it stands at the moment, we cannot perform our annual restocking program in the same way by sourcing these supplies from GB. And usually that would amount to 3 or 4 million fish on an annual basis. So that's where we were before. Now, the only potential solution to that problem is to source these glass eels from elsewhere within the EU. And most notably, we'll be looking towards France. We have imported from France in the past, and we're doing so, negotiating to do so now over the next few days. One of the practical issues related to that is that normally that import of these juvenile fish, we prefer to keep it until about March, April time, when water temperatures within our own lake here have risen a little, and we have more confidence in maximising survival rates and so on. The French season, on the other hand, tends to happen a bit earlier. These juvenile fish, or this cohort of juvenile fish, would have first been seen in the southern reaches of Europe as far back as November, December last year, starting in Spain and Portugal and heading north, and now in France. Eventually they will arrive in GB in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But you have to strike while the iron's hot in this case, because it's a very short season. It's a matter of a few weeks, and if you sit in your hands and wait for things to happen for you, you will miss the boat, quite literally. So at the moment we're going ahead with imports from France next week, and one of the issues is that having to go in that direction adds to the cost. We're seeing a significant increase in the cost, possibly as much as 50% over what we might have expected to pay for the glass eels this year. So that's the issue that's exercising us mostly at the moment. We are lobbying public representatives on both sides of the Irish Sea to look at this problem, because there's a serious issue here with the glass eel fishery on the Severn and the River Parrett, and that particular industry supports a couple of hundred fishermen as well, like ourselves. We have 250 fishermen gaining some livelihood from the industry on Lough Neagh. But equally, there are glass eel fishermen within GB that currently cannot operate either until there's further clarity in this. And aside from that, my opinion on all of this is that the original regulation introduced by Europe and presumably will be transposed into UK law if not already. But the intention of that regulation was to address the decline, bring about a recovery in stock levels. It has nothing to do with trade or commerce. It's purely and simply about the species. And I would contend that what's happening this year and potentially will continue to happen in years to come is that these millions of fish which are arriving in the Bristol Channel area and have an innate instinct to move from the saltwater environment into freshwater rivers and onwards onto headland lakes and so on further upstream. My concern is that if they're not being fished for, if they're not being translocated to wild fishes such as ours, which I would contend is the primary destination for them, at least it should be, or to eel farms, then the likelihood is that millions of these fish will perish, and that's contrary to the intent of the regulation, in my opinion. So basically, we're lobbying a lot of people of influence to see if something can be looked at in terms of a derogation here, but because it's not simply a commercial matter, the influence of the CITES group, which is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, their influence is a significant player in this. The approach taken by the Scientific Review Group in Europe, which advises policymakers, is that because it's a single stock species, they cannot look in isolation at a certain jurisdiction or even a member state. So they can only take a sort of a pan-European approach to this. And we feel that in the interest of the industry on both sides of the Irish Sea, that there needs to be consideration given to a solution to this by way of a derogation or whatever. But it potentially is going to tell a bad tale for ourselves in the long run if we cannot continue with our restocking program to the level that we regard as satisfactory, and the scientists tell us that a lake the size of Lough Neagh needs about 8 to 10 million juvenile eels introduced every year, either by way of natural recruitment or through additional restocking. But yeah, the size of the lake can easily sustain that sort of number. We would reckon we need close to that to sustain current fishing intensity, which we regard as the bare minimum to provide a reasonable livelihood for those who are engaged in it at the moment. And just to put that in context, there are about 100 boats, small inland boats, fishing for eels in Lough Neagh. For quite a few of them, it's seasonal. It's seasonal anyhow, but a number of them will fish a few weeks during the summer. Others, on the other hand, will fish throughout the season from May to the end of October. And in the course of that, they generate, the fishing industry in Lough Neagh contributes in excess of £3 million annually to the local rural economy. So it's important, and we are deeply concerned about what's going to happen to us in the long run because of some of these unintended consequences that we're now confronted with.
How many people does the industry employ? Is it full-time workers, part-time workers?
Well, the fishermen themselves are self-employed, or so they're not employees of the cooperative as such.
Yeah.
The cooperative would have, well, it varies because of the different needs at certain times of the season, but usually between 16 and 20 staff. Labour staff needs increase in the autumn time when we're silver eel fishing on the river here, and we do need to bring in extra help. And at that stage, we would normally employ a few of our fishermen from the Lough because of their experience to help us here on site at the cooperative. But yeah, our typical employment levels are around 16 to 20.
So when you recruit young eels from, say, like France, what would be the difference between, and price-wise, between recruiting them from France and recruiting them from like Bristol? Would it be more expensive, or would it be, what would be the extra costs that would be involved?
There are extra costs involved. The price of glass eels is notoriously volatile and will depend on, I mean, there can be variations from season to season, and the quantities of these fish that are available for purchase, regarded as surpluses in their own jurisdictions. And there's always competition from eel farms as well, and that tends to push the price up. In the past, there would have been a competition from interests outside of the EU, particularly in Asia, and that in the past has been responsible for pushing prices literally beyond our reach. But part of the regulations introduced back in 2007 eventually worked themselves through to on a sliding scale to the point where the export of these glass eels to any jurisdiction outside of Europe is now banned. That's not to say there hasn't been issues with a black market in them, but nevertheless, prices have remained high. And they do vary as the season goes on, depending on how successful a season it is in terms of catches. As we speak today about it, we're hoping to import glass eels next week, and at this point in time, they're approximately 50%, costing us 50% more than the average price we paid in 2020.
That's a big increase in the price.
And maybe to put that in context, Oliver, I should add that our total expenditure, for example, in glass eel restocking last year was $333,000.
And how much would fisheries generate for the Northern Ireland economy in the year? Would it be a big contributor?
Well, we are a significant contributor to the local rural economy, certainly. Annual turnover is £3 to £3.5 million per year. Again, because it's a wild fishery, that can fluctuate, a few $100,000 either side. But on average, in the past 10 years or so, we have regularly been in around the £3 million turnover per annum.
And the fisheries on Lough Neagh was very, very big fisheries at one time, a big natural fisheries, and that declined some years back. But do you see the reintroduction of young eels into the lake? Does that benefit the environment? Does that keep a regulation in the lake that would have been missing if they weren't brought in?
Absolutely. We regard ourselves as a very significant contributor to the lake and the conservation efforts that are made on Lough Neagh. It is true to say that in the past there would have been more people involved in the eel industry in Lough Neagh, and I should add, by the way, that there's also fishing for other species of fish which we collectively call scale fish, other freshwater fish such as trout, Lough Neagh pollen, bream, roach, pike, and perch. But if we're concentrating on the eels, in the past we could have had 150 to 180 boats fishing on Lough Neagh for eels. Now that's down to about 100 to 110. And there are a number of reasons for that. I think we're not like probably like sea fishers across the world. We're not attracting young people into it, into the industry because they now have better opportunities, work which is less dangerous, better paid, and all of those good things. But I think we're at a point now where, with our restocking program and our very strict conservation measures, which include a limit on the number of licenses, we operated a quota before 40 years ago, before it was fashionable to do so in terms of fisheries. So we've been very proactive throughout the life of the cooperative, which was incidentally was first established in 1965. So, you know, we have over 50 years of a track record in being very sound custodians of the fishery on Lough Neagh. And when we acquired the scale fishing rights back in the early 90s, that completed the loop for us, so to speak. So, as I often remind fishermen, um, without whom, by the way, there would be no need for a cooperative, but you know, we have been and we are in a position where, in many respects, the success of Lough Neagh going into the future, aside from the external influences we're discussing at the moment or being challenged with at the moment, the future of the industry is in the hands of fishermen, and that's where it belongs. They're the proper custodians of Lough Neagh. If they don't buy into the ethos of the co-op and the idea of conserving, like we have to acknowledge as a valuable natural resource, but we also must recognise it's a finite resource. If it's not properly managed, um, then there is no future. So everything that we have done for decades on Lough Neagh is pointing towards sustainability. That's essentially what we're about, and we have been successful in that, particularly in relation to the eels, in the sense that with our management and control, management and regulation, I suppose, is the best way to put it, because we do impose restrictions, we do impose uh, particular measures at particular times of the year when we feel it's necessary. All of that results in, and we have a proven track record in this, that all of it results in us staying compliant with what the regulation is intended to do in terms of the escapement of mature fish from the system back to the wild to breed and so perpetuate the species. You know, I have said in the past, and I firmly believe it, were it not for the commercial fishery on Lough Neagh and the way it's um, the way it's managed, um, the species and the industry across the continent would be the poorer for that. And I say that with confidence because the record will show that when scientific monitoring and surveying is carried out on an annual basis, we consistently meet these escapement targets, which is one of the key issues built into the regulations to bring about a recovery in the stock.
And on the ban from importing glass eels from the UK, do you think there should be a solution there, or what do you think should be done? Because it was a valuable source for, both ways ecologically.
Yeah, certainly I firmly believe something should be done because I think what's the position that we're facing at the moment is detrimental in so many ways, and it's contrary to the intention behind the regulation to bring about this recovery that I've spoken about. It's exactly what can be done about it within the confines of the CITES classification as a listed endangered species. That'll be for others to decide, but my argument is that if you stand back and take a common sense look at the situation as it is at the moment, it's untenable really, because everybody recognizes the value of the juvenile fish, which are approaching European shores as we speak. It just does not make sense under the current situation to stand by and let those fish basically perish in due course. Um, because we're talking about millions of fish here, um, with the potential in systems such as ours to perpetuate the species and to add value to the industry as a whole. So what can be done? I think we need to be looking seriously at some sort of derogation, to allow us to have access to those surplus glass eels in the like of the Bristol Channel area, for example. One of the things that we need to understand is that these surpluses, particularly in the Bristol Channel area and the Bay of Biscay and so on, the surpluses exist because these fish are, because of perhaps, well, to some extent certainly anyway, are being prevented from making their way upstream due to man-made obstructions such as sluice gates and barrages, hydroelectric plants, even natural occurring weirs and so on. So, whilst small numbers of them will be able to navigate some of the rivers, many of them won't be. So, to my mind, it makes sense to fish for these fish and make sure that they're added to systems such as our own, which is a win-win situation for everybody, because it's a positive contribution to the problems which exist there. Because eels, I would add, Oliver, because eels are relatively long lived in fish terms, I mean, female mature silver eels migrating out of this system are known to be on average between 18 and 20 years old. So when we look back at all of the stocks that we have put into Lough, I looked at this quite recently, over the past 35 years, we have purchased an additional 120 million fish to put into Lough as part of our restocking program. Alongside of that, and together with that, we recruited over 110 million fish through natural means. Those fish would have been arriving into our system here anyhow, and that's another aspect of it. I mean, without the fishery here generating money to pay wages and so on, we would not even be able to look after that natural process. Because again, we have sluice gates and we have barriers and natural occurring weirs on the river, which will prevent these fish making their way into Lough. So in practice, what happens is we trap those down at the mouth of the river and we transport them. The scientists will tell us, left to their own devices, whatever percentage of them could successfully navigate the river would take 2 to 3 years to do that. With the system that we operate at considerable expense to ourselves, I might add, as we trap them at the river mouth and then transport them by road. We can do that within an hour. So it's a lot shorter journey, it's short circuits, and it's equally you're negating the potential for predation and loss through other natural occurring events. These juvenile fish, as I said, coming in from the sea, carried on global currents, they spend a couple or 3 weeks in what's known as the salt waves. That's to make that transition from the salt water to the fresh water. And once they've done that and begun to feed and grow and develop the power to swim, it's only at that stage actually to develop the power to swim. It's after that stage then when they will climb the various traps and so on that we have there for that. It's only after that that then we start to harvest those and transport them directly into Lough. So it's just to repeat, if we didn't have the setup, the commercial setup in Lough, which involves fishing, involves restocking and all of that, we couldn't afford to contribute in the way that we're doing to the well-being and the future sustainability of the species. And let's not lose sight of the fact that Lough produces approximately 15 to 16% of all wild caught eels in Europe. So we regard ourselves as a significant player in all of this. We played our part in that over the last 10 to 15 years when European authorities were considering what to do. We were front and center, if you like, in terms of the measures that we had experience of, and we encouraged others to do as well. And the irony is now that as a consequence of Brexit, we're now on the outside looking in on all of this. And the monies, the millions of pounds, literally millions of pounds, 5 million plus that we have invested in supplementary restocking over the last 30 years. You know, your question, you know, what has it led to? Because the life expectancy of the eel, as I said earlier, can be up to 20 years. So in theory, investments in restocking that we have made over the last 10, 15, 20 years have still to be realised. You know, so that you look back on that and say, well, you know, how have we arrived at this situation that haven't invested all that money? Admittedly, in more recent years, we've had support under European Maritime and Fisheries Fund. There were many, many years before that when we did it literally out of our own pockets, from profits that were retained from the commercial activity on the Lough. So it does leave us with big concerns for the future.
Well, Pat, thank you for that. It's very interesting, and to realise that there's so much work that goes into looking after the eels on Lough Neagh, and we hope that you find a solution for the future and that you can continue on with your good work there. Thank you very much, Pat.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you.